Demography is destiny, they say, and two thinkers on demography and geopolitics who really stand out on YouTube, Peter Zeihan and Emmanuel Todd. Who should you listen to so you can understand the basics of demography and geopolitics? I'm Jeff Rich, and here on the Burning Archive, I try to look at the history and social and cultural changes that underlie so much of what we talk day to day about in the news, including in geopolitics. There are a lot of deeper changes happening that don't really get that well reported either in the mainstream or indeed in the alternative media. And I should know, I was a government official for 33 years. I saw how a lot of the things were reported, and I really kind of specialised in social policy. And one thing you really need to get across in a social policy is demographic statistics, demographic analysis. What really are the social changes happening in our society, like population ageing, changing fertility, those kinds of things. Indeed, at one point I actually worked with this man, Peter MacDonald, who won the Nobel Prize, so to speak, for demography. Undoubtedly, population is a source of power in geopolitics. It's part of the wealth of nations, I guess. How many people, how well educated the people are, whether their lives are getting better and longer and happier, and whether their populations are declining or having major problems. And John Mearsheimer, for example, claims there are really two sources of power: population and GDP, economics. That is what determines a country to be a great power in his view. I myself think there are at least 7: territory, economy, diplomatic power, cultural power, and a whole lot more. But looking at the big challenges of demography is a key thing to do in geopolitics. But a lot of the commentary on demography and geopolitics, or in those kind of channels, is not that well grounded in really understanding the kind of social and historical changes that are happening in populations. Their size, the death rates, fertility rates, life expectancy, aging, migration, family systems, the transfer of resources between the young and the old, between generations. All of these things happen. Demography can explain a lot, but whether it is a simple line between population growth or population age structure and the destiny of great powers is another question altogether. And these two thinkers, Peter Zeihan and Emmanuel Todd, both make broad, big arguments, big picture arguments about geopolitics and demography. Peter Zeihan focuses a lot on the population aging structure, the balance of young and old in societies, and whether that's good for them or bad for them. And he is well known for his predictions of collapse of China and other countries. And his tendency to argue that the United States has unique resource endowments and its relatively youthful, innovative, economically dynamic population will see it through all the crises of change. And some of his ideas have been taken up broadly in the popular culture, and in recent times there's been particularly Elon Musk has picked up issues around fertility, and there's been a bit of an alarmist scare about declining fertility rates and whether population of whole societies will suddenly collapse. I did a video on that which you can see there, but I'll also include a link to it in the description that you might want to watch next. On the other hand, Emmanuel Todd also focuses on demographic fundamentals, uses them to try to understand the drivers of change in geopolitics, the drivers of change in history, the relative power, and the kind of ideas and value systems that and how they are different across the world. But he also relied on demographic statistics to make his, in fact, accurate prediction, although whether it was the real cause of this collapse, I'm not so sure. But he did predict the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early to mid-1970s on the basis of demographic trends, in particular a rise in the late 1960s and early 1970s in infant mortality in the Soviet Union, a trend that he's actually observed occurring in the United States of America today. Similarly, in his book, The Defeat of the West, he also makes extensive use of population statistics and demographic analysis of Russia, Ukraine, the United States, and other Western countries. So let's have a look at these two people and try to answer the question of who can you trust most, and what's more, what is it that you should really take out from their assessments about the basics of demographics and geopolitics. So first, let's look at Peter Zeihan. Now, Peter Zeihan is a brilliant communicator. He's a great simplifier, and he has a very energetic presence, and these are all fantastic things. And he has helped emphasize some key, attributes around population structure in his analysis of the different societies. He does grasp well one key aspect, which is the population age structure, and as he explains how it used to be, a triangle or pyramid, and it's become more like that, more of a chimney. But he then tends to argue that it's becoming more like a wine glass, and in at least some societies, and that the disappearance of the younger age brackets will irredeemably lead to the collapse of societies. He tends to analyse population and demographic issues, if I were to put it this way, through the eyes of investment analysis. It's based on some pretty simple ratios of, well, what can you expect with this, this ratio of young versus old in terms of wealth distribution, cash flows, the dynamism of the economy, the participation in economic activity. And what's more, he has a tendency to exaggerate and extrapolate from existing trends without really looking for some of the other balancing and complicating factors that are going on in societies. You can have, there are, obviously so, more older people relatively than there were 50 years ago in all populations all around the world. But what those older people like me, 60-year-old YouTuber, do with their lives is significantly different. The capabilities created by social structures, by cultures, by relationships between people is not necessarily revealed in a simple population age structure chart. And as a result of this perhaps oversimplification and exaggeration, Peter Zeihan has, acquired something of a reputation for making hasty and false predictions of collapse. You can go back and look through his many videos where he's talking about the looming collapse of China, the collapse of Russia, the collapse of Ukraine. And usually the date gets fudged a little bit, but the collapse is always about to happen. Everywhere, of course, but in the United States, of course, where Peter Zeihan is based, and which, despite its many rather sad social statistics like life expectancy, like infant mortality, like appalling health system and a lack of social security and a lack of maternity leave, so many other things, somehow or other Peter Zeihan has confidence that demography is destiny in the United States and they will always triumph. And here his background may be relevant. He did a political science degree. He was a consultant for the geopolitical analyst firm Stratfor, which has a certain reputation around the world. Indeed, he even worked for the American Embassy in Australia, of all places. And if you've ever watched his video on Australia in the post-American world, the so-called post-American world, the post-global, current era of globalization world, it's kind of revealing of what American officials really think about Australia. So he bills himself as a geopolitical analysis. He's in that tradition of geopolitical risk analysis of investment firms that take pretty superficial views of different countries to advise companies about whether or not they should trust putting their money in that country and the government of that country. It's big business, but I don't know if it really leads to high quality thinking and scholarship. And as a result, I think when you look at Peter Zeihan's demographic geopolitical analysis, you get a lot of grand geopolitical analysis and a lot of pretty shallow demographic understanding. By contrast, Emmanuel Todd is, by training, profession, and decades of work, a true demographer and social historian. That has been his specialty. He can reel off huge ranges of international statistics about different facets of demography and family systems in different countries. He worked for one of the major demographic research institutes in France for a long time. His geopolitical essays, like Defeat of the West, like his prediction on the Soviet Union, are more a kind of a sideline he does rather than his main work. And his particular expertise is really around family systems, the sort of structure of, mother, father, brother, sister, who lives together. Is it a 3-generation family? How do the marriages work? All these kind of things. The way in which those sort of family systems differ across countries, and they differ very, very substantially across countries. And in a way, you can't just look at a population pyramid about, old, young, and men and women without actually looking at the deeper issues of the actual dynamics of the society that are created by the nature of the relationships between different generations, the relationships of mutual support and connection and affiliation that are created by those different relationships. So that is actually what Emmanuel Todd really focuses on. And what's more, he tends to focus not just on surface level predictions of what a demographic structure means for the economy as a whole. He looks at the way in which different family systems, different demographic patterns lead to broad and to some degree unpredictable outcomes for values, for cultures, and also for how those sort of social patterns get manifested at a political level and a geopolitical level, at an international relations level. One of his key analyses is there is a divergence in demography between China and Russia and India and the key countries of the West. And this whole argument is set out in quite a lot of detail in his book Lineages of Modernity, which is available in English, unlike The Defeat of the West. I may well do another video on that at a later point, but it's worth also noting that Emmanuel Todd's most recent book is like a popular, actually a cartoon a version of his work on family systems based on Lineages of Modernity and his lifetime of work in demography that kind of sets out these sorts of issues in a readily understandable way, perhaps to counter some of the cliched popular versions that are spread by people like Elon Musk and indeed by Peter Zeihan. And you can actually see I'll include a link in the video description below to Emmanuel Todd talking about that. In that book, in Lineages of Modernity, he makes the point that our Western societies, he makes a deeper point about the kind of population structure than Peter Zeihan makes. He makes the point that our Western our current modern societies, it's not just Western societies, have never been older, richer, better educated, and more devoid of collective belief. And that creates a whole lot of unique challenges for our societies, challenges that we are to some degree adapting to rather than leading to instantaneous collapse. He observes how things have changed and tries to ask, what does this really mean for how we're going to respond, rather than just say, well, this is different to what it was 50 years before, and if we apply, as Peter Zeihan does, I guess, the nostrums, the ratios that we're used to, this cannot possibly be sustainable. In other words, he has a sophisticated understanding of the dynamics of demography and how they work their way through societies, cultures, and geopolitics. And this shows in his book, The Defeat of the West, where he anchors, for example, his analysis of Russian demography. Well, he anchors his analysis of why Russia made a decision to engage in the war in Ukraine in 2022 in a demographic analysis, the numbers of men of fighting age in Russia at the moment, and the fact that that is likely to reduce in the future. And he has similarly sophisticated analysis of Ukraine's demographic situation and indeed of America's demographic situation. His discussion of the defeat of the West is in many ways a deep social history of some of the major changes in demography, in social structure, and the way that's played out in values, in culture, and in politics and social relationships over the last 50 years ago, manifesting in what he describes as the self-defeat of the West in Ukraine. And indeed, he makes one key comment in the book that in many of his talks about the book, some of which I've featured here on the YouTube channel, he makes the point that demographic statistics are much more reliable than most economic statistics. Peter Zeihan will make a quick read from a demographic chart to a whole lot of assumed ratios about economics. But Emmanuel Todd makes the point that most demographic statistics really can't be fudged in the way that GDP and other sorts of economic statistics are. In many ways, being able to count the number of dead people and the number of births and the number of marriages and all those kind of things is a lot more reliable and a lot more soundly based in reality than growth rates and investment ratios and cash flows and all that kind of thing. So who should you trust? Let's look at 3 criteria to try to make that decision: depth, breadth, reliability of their judgment. On depth, Emmanuel Todd is the clear winner. He has, a lifetime of working in demography, and he has a depth of understanding that simply makes Peter Zeihan look like, I guess, what he is, which is a geopolitical risk analyst from a consulting firm. On breadth, again, look at the range of demographic issues that Emmanuel Todd looks at the genuine understanding he has across the world of family systems and demographic statistics across countries. He's not looking at superficial analyses of China or Russia or other countries to support an overall conclusion that the US is always victorious. He has a really genuine breadth of understanding. And then on reliability of judgment, well, I can't tell you how many times Peter Zeihan has predicted the collapse of China. It simply hasn't happened yet. I guess Emmanuel Todd did predict the collapse of the Soviet Union, and he did predict the defeat of the West in Ukraine. Look, of course, the point is not just to say, well, Todd's better than Zeihan, just listen to Emmanuel Todd. The real point of this discussion is to bring out what it is about Todd's thinking that you can apply to your own thinking about demography and geopolitics, rather than just, rely upon one single authority. And again, let's look at those things: depth, breadth, and testing your judgment against the particulars of history and demography. If we want to have a depth of analysis of demography and its relationship to geopolitics, population and its contribution to power, we need to look at a deeper level than just superficial age structure pyramids. We need to look at some of the underlying family systems, some of the ways in which societies are adapting to trends like population ageing and declining fertility, of rebalancing gender roles in the home and in the workplace, and go at a much deeper level than the sort of investment ratio analysis that Peter Zeihan does. We also need to think broadly. We need to think about demography's relationship to society, to culture, to geopolitics. We need to think about all those aspects of demography. We need to think about life expectancy and fertility and mortality and marriage patterns and religious patterns and aging and migration and family systems and the transfer of resources between generations. There's this whole idea in demography. The guy I mentioned before, Peter McDonald, talked about national transfer accounts that shows, older people give money to their children. They pass on their assets. They support their children when they're young, and sometimes their children will support them when they're old. And so there's all these sort of complicated transfers, some of which are also done by governments on their behalf. Governments spend a lot of money on young people during their education, and it's a bit of a mix with older people, depending on what the income retirement systems are in different countries. And as a result, that people talk about national transfer accounts that actually look at the very complex patterns of the way in which money sort of passes between generations over the life cycle, from the age of 0 to the age of 90 or 100 or whatever the life expectancy is. And those patterns are very different in different societies, partly because of the family systems and the welfare systems and the cultures that Emmanuel Todd talks about in Lineages of Modernity. And then finally, you should also test the particulars of the historical analysis. The population aging is a phenomenon that has occurred with variations across most societies over the last 150 years. And obviously different patterns of war and wealth and family systems have led to slightly different trajectories along the way. But one cannot simply assume there's a certain normal pattern of population age structure and an abnormal one, and just assume that, I guess, America's pattern is the normal, the right one, the successful one, and every other country has both no capacity to adapt to changes and everything that departs from the American standard is, pathological. So overall, I'd say Peter Zeihan and all the popular instant experts on fertility or aging or population collapse that are proliferating to some degree on YouTube are just what I'd describe as shallow chart jockeys. They're the kind of people you see in investment banks looking at the screens and making a whole lot of judgments based on a two-dimensional chart about what's going on in the world rather than looking at the complex reality of the world. And Todd and people like him who think like him with that broader social, cultural and historical perspective are really trying to sense how the world is really changing, trying to look through the chart to the fundamental relationships and patterns and social drivers and historical changes that are occurring in society rather than just making superficial judgments based on a chart. No one has ever actually lived in societies with our unique demographic changes, our unique population structures, our unique shifting social, cultural belief systems, and no one really knows what the future holds for us. But also, we can all make adaptations to this unique situation we have found ourselves in. Look, here am I, a 60-year-old YouTuber. 50 years ago, I would have been a couple of years away from a heart attack. Here I am, retired government official, talking to you on YouTube. So I'd rely on Emmanuel Todd, not Peter Zeihan. And if you also want to get a bit of a broader, deeper, more historically informed judgment around what's really going on in the world, I really would recommend you go over to my Substack at jeffrich.substack.com. Sign up there and you'll get weekly history book recommendations as part of my World History World Tour, where I'm looking at the United States, Russia, India, China, and Europe this year, and maybe some more cultures and great powers next year as well, and trying to shift my perspective and your perspective on how to understand their role in the world with some quality world history, including coming up in that series, especially for my paid subscribers who get a deep dive weekly. You can also read my piece on Emmanuel Todd's chapter on health in the United States, why America spends more to die more, why the United States has such appalling health statistics and health outcomes. And you might also want to check out this piece on population collapse and some of the loony ideas of Elon Musk that I did last year, and has a lot of great material in it, including from some of the real experts on demography and geopolitics, the United Nations Population Division.